Good to see all of you doing pretty well, I trust. Been in a series that I've entitled very creatively, That's on Me, because today we live in a culture where nothing's on me. It's all on you, right? And so we're asking a question, a very simple question. Am I taking responsibility for my life? Because irresponsibility is very difficult to see in ourselves. It's even harder to admit. So then we're asking this question over and over and over. And I want you to ask it out loud with me. Will you repeat it with me? Am I taking responsibility for my life? We've learned a few things about this subject so far that I hope have been a little bit eye-opening or helpful to you. One is that we all are created by God to be responsible. That's how He intended it to be, for us to have responsibility. And the reason that is number two, when we are responsible, we're the happiest, we're the most fulfilled, we're the most complete, because that's how we were designed. When you feel like you're doing something and you're giving it your best, you always feel better about yourself, and if you don't, you won't feel good about yourself. That's how it works. And then what we said is that when you act responsibly, you keep some things from happening, because irresponsibility always results in conflict. Conflict with others, conflict within yourself, where you feel guilt and you feel shame, because it goes back to the fact that you didn't live up to your responsibility. So whether you have been irresponsible with your morality or with your kids or spouse or money or parents and on it goes, we feel bad about ourselves. We feel shame and guilt because we've abandoned our responsibility, and that's how we were created to operate. Another thing that we've touched on is that our irresponsibility, and this was a big one, eventually becomes somebody else's responsibility, because somebody else has to come and clean up our mess every time. In other words, irresponsibility is not just a personal thing, it's a corporate thing. It always is a corporate thing, because it always impacts everybody that's connected to us. That's just how it works. Now, the last time we were together last week, we looked at this biblical principle that is kind of behind the whole thing. It's one that kind of stings a little bit. We don't like it all that well, but it is as sure as the law of gravity. And it's this principle, the principle of sowing and reaping. You reap what you sow. Eventually, we kind of figure that out, or we should, because irresponsibility always catches up with us in one form or fashion, right? It always does. Now today, I'm going to do something a little different. I want you to stick with me. I'm going to go really fast. It's a short message. Not going to keep you very long, but I'm going to look at an Old Testament story that you may not be familiar with, but you probably have heard of. At least you've heard of the main character. I'm going to be looking at the Old Testament book of Joshua chapter 7. And in this story, before I go into it and read it and share it with you, there are three different groups of people that are represented in this story, and it's the same three groups of people that are represented in this room today. And every time we gather, okay? It's going to address this one group of people who have this religious mindset, kind of like us, but have this tendency to kind of hide or mask our irresponsibility behind this thing called prayer. Because this is what we do all the time. Whenever you're irresponsible, whenever I'm irresponsible and there's a consequence, what is it that the first thing we do? We go pray. God, get me out of this. God, help me with this. Whatever. We pray. And sometimes, I'm looking at it from a little different angle, church people are the most irresponsible people in the community because of this thing called prayer. They act like that they're in tune with God. They give a very good religious upfront, persona, if you will. But the problem is, and this is where the world kind of pushes back and goes, those people are ridiculous. We're so quick to say to anything that arises, well, let's just pray about that. Or I'll be praying for you about that. And the problem is, prayer's a great concept. We should pray all the time. But a lot of times we beg off on prayer so that we don't have to do anything. You see the difference? Praying about it is one issue, and then and asking God to do what God can do, but then we've got our part to do. And so sometimes we don't actually do anything, and I want to talk to you a little bit about that today. Let me give you an example of that. When I was a kid, ancient, many years ago, Judy and I were kids, and John and I were kids. It's like, what, 1940s or something? I don't remember. Anyway, we were kids. We used to have these things in our community. I know you all had them back in your all's area too. We used to have these things called revivals. Do any of y'all know what a revival is? You've heard of them? Can somebody just say yes so I'll feel better? Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, you know. So anyway, we'd have these revivals, and ours usually lasted about 10 days long. And what it is it's a designated time frame. We always had them in the summertime. Designated time frame where we had several days in a row of preaching and singing. We'd always invite outside music. We'd invite outside speaker, and they would come to my little home church. And for months leading up to this, all summer long, our minister would get up and say, "Friends, want you to pray for our revival." As if, you know, the idea is that the hope was, and I get it, that something special was going to happen during that designated week as God's Spirit would move. And that was our intent. But I can remember sitting there, especially when I became an older teenager. I can remember sitting there in church, and I was thinking to myself, when they were always asking us to pray for revival. And I kept thinking to myself, well, that's good, but why don't we get a new song leader? Because our song leader was like 90 and couldn't carry a tune in a bucket. Maybe we ought to do that. Or how about this? If our minister isn't good enough to preach the revival and we have to hire this outside guy, then why don't we hire him for a permanent minister? And maybe we can have a bigger crowd every single week. And why don't we get those singers to come to our church more regularly rather than just once a year? And then I can remember sitting there thinking this. And why don't we get new leaders? Because ever since I've been a young person here at this church for 15 years, all of our leaders have done is debated whether or not we ought to have air conditioning in the church. We're having our revival in August. It's going to be 90 in the building. And then we're praying for people to come. Who's going to come sit on hardwood pews for 2 hours 10 nights in a row in August with no air conditioning? You see where I'm going with this? So I can remember even as a young person thinking to myself, if everyone would just get serious about their job, we could have revival every week. This would be great. But as Christians, God bless our hearts, we tend to hide behind prayers, do we not? And not act responsible. We tend to mask our irresponsibility with this concept of prayer. Okay, well, another group in the story that's addressed are those of us who have great compassion for other people, but we apply it incorrectly. This is something else we're very guilty of. That's when we see somebody acting irresponsible, and instead of holding them accountable, we justify in our mind for all the reasons why they're not being responsible. This is our culture today. Well, they never had a dad. Their mom was on drugs when they were small. They never had any money. There's a disability there. They weren't the brightest bulb in the pack to begin with. And so we perpetuate irresponsibility by continuing to make excuses for people. And it's not helping. The other group in this story that is addressed is this group of people who don't like that whole thing we talked about last week. They don't like that whole sowing and reaping thing because in their minds, down deep and in their hearts, they feel like they've sown good seeds and yet they're reaping everybody else's irresponsibility. The consequence. I feel like I've done my part, but they're not doing theirs, and as a result, here's where we are. So it's those three groups of people that's being addressed. Those are still all represented in his church today as well as in our community. But here's how the story goes in Joshua chapter 7. Joshua, you've heard of him before. He's a military leader for Israel. He is leading the children of Israel. Now stay with me in this because this plays really into the whole crux of the story. He's leading the Israelites into the promised land because Moses has died. He has taken over leadership, okay? And he's leading these people into a land, this promised land, the land of Canaan, the Holy Land, the promised land. It's all the same place. He's leading these people into this land, and God has told them, when you go in, you got to run everybody else out. You got to destroy them if they resist. And when you read that at first, it kind of makes God out to be some kind of a monster. So I want to explain that very briefly. 650 years before what we're reading about in Joshua 7, God came to a man by the name of Abraham, who we call Father Abraham because he's a father of the Hebrew nation, the father of the Israelites, the father of the Jews, okay? And he comes to him with a promise. He says, Abraham, I'm going to make you and your descendants a great nation, more vast than the sands of the sea, or sands on the seashore and the stars in the heaven. Great nation. To which Abraham looks back and says, well, you better hurry up because I'm getting old, my wife is old, we ain't got no kids. But God gave them miraculously a son, and their son had more sons, and their sons had sons, and so forth and so on. And this goes on. And so God is keeping his promise to raise up this nation as it's becoming populated. But as God told Abraham, I'm going to raise up a nation, he said, I'm not going to do it here. This is the land you're going to eventually have forever. I'm going to promise this land to you, but I'm not going to raise you up here. It's going to be somewhere else. And that's exactly what God did. They never expected it was going to be in Egypt. Do you remember the whole story of Egypt? They're enslaved in Egypt for 400 years. They become a slave nation. And so all of these Hebrew children had more children and had more children for 400 years. And then Moses shows up, leads them miraculously out from underneath Pharaoh and his thumb in Egypt. And so now Moses has died. Joshua is bringing these people back home to the land of promise. Now, here's another thing you need to keep in mind. When Abraham was initially given that commission by God, you're going to be a father of a great nation, there was only about 45 people in his household. 400 and some years later, now there's about 2 million of them. Okay? So it's going to be a tough job. The other thing that's difficult for us is that we think, why is it that God would have to wipe all these other people out that are living there so Israel could move in and take over the land? Well, with regard to this, and I'm going to give you the short version, one of the best verses in the Old Testament to understand this is found in Genesis 15. I want to read it to you because I want you to at least have an explanation as to why we feel that when it comes to feeling about God and all the blood and violence. Because sometimes it's hard for people to reconcile the God of the Old Testament with the God of the New Testament because God is love. God is love, which is true. It is true. But God is also just. And also God keeps his word. So Genesis 15:16 reads like this. God is speaking to Abraham and he says, in the 4th generation, he says, your descendants will come back here to the promised land. For the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure. For the sin of the Amorites has not yet reached its full measure. Here's a dynamic about the Old Testament that isn't so emotionally satisfying, but it is an explanation. There were groups of people that were living in Canaan, the Holy Land, the Promised Land, who were so pagan and so extreme that God is in essence saying, I'm giving them time to right their wrongs, but as time goes by, if they don't right their wrongs, it's better for these people to be out of existence because they're never going to change. And they are going to impact my people, and I can't allow that to happen. So this is a promise of preservation. These cultures were so vile that it will, on a regular daily basis, it was no big deal to sacrifice newborn babies to their false gods to appease the false gods. They treated their livestock better than they treated women. They were more valuable. And God says, I'm giving them time, but I'm going to exterminate them because this group of people is opposite of everything that I stand for. So here's where we're coming to the story. So God brings his people into the promised land. And as he's bringing them into the promised land, he said, here's what I want you to do. Don't marry the people that live there. Don't talk with the people that are living there. I don't want you to take any of their cows, any of their goats, any of their sheep. I don't want you to take any of their gold or their silver. I don't want you to have anything to do with them because we are starting something brand new. Now, the only way to do it, God is telling them, is for you guys to move in and become an independent nation so that you will have a completely different worldview and you won't be contaminated by theirs. And he says, so it's imperative that you push them out And if they won't run, exterminate them and take over, because I have given them a chance for 400 years to change, and this group of people have not changed. So for preservation of you, you've got to get rid of them. Now, I know that may not be emotionally satisfying, but that's the backdrop for this story. So here's what happens. God, through Joshua, is leading the Israelites into the land of Canaan. And the first city that they come up against is a city that you're going to recognize, because if you went to VBS or any kind of Sunday school as a kid, you probably learned and sang about it. It was the city of Jericho, fortified by these huge walls. Remember, and they blew the trumpets, they marched around the walls, and the walls came tumbling down. We used to sing about it as kids. So the battle of Jericho over this fortified city was easy, and they took it very quickly. And now the next city that they're going to come up against is a little tiny itty-bitty city of Ai. Ai. But here's what's going on. Unbeknownst to Joshua, who is leading them, something happened in Jericho that he was not aware of. God would have been very clear to them that when they defeated Jericho, they were to leave it all there in rubble. Leave everything there. Do not take anything from that city. No spoils. Destroy it. Leave it in a pile. No contamination among his people. Now that's what they were supposed to do. And almost everybody did it, but it was really hard, especially from one guy who's by the name we know of today as Achan, A-C-H-A-N, Achan. Apparently, as he was going through Jericho, he kicked some silver or gold or something, and he looked down at it and he goes, "What are we doing? I mean, we're going to leave all this stuff? I mean, what are we doing here? I mean, why can't we take it? I mean, somebody's going to get it. It might as well be us." And he looks around, it might as well be me. And so he takes this silver and his gold, because this gold, and he kind of tucks it away because he's thinking finders, keepers, losers, weepers. I guess, I don't know. So he takes it and he hides it under the corner of his tent. And nobody knows it's there except Achan and maybe a couple of his family members. And Joshua has no idea. He thinks we've destroyed Jericho. We're moving on to the next city. The next city happens to be this little community of Ai. And so that's where the story picks up, and that's where it falls apart. So let's read it together. Joshua 7:2. Joshua sent men from Jericho to Ai, which is near Beth-aven, east of Bethel. And he told them, he said, "Here's what I want you to do. Go up and spy out the region." So the men went up and spied it out. When they returned to Joshua, they said, "Not all the army will need to go up there, Joshua, to Ai. Send 2,000 or 3,000 men to take it, and do not weary the whole army, for only a few people live there. We've checked it out. It's certainly not like Jericho. We'll take it easy. We'll show up. They'll probably tuck tail and run. We won't even have to do anything." Verse 4. So about 3,000 of the troops went up. That word "but" changes a lot, doesn't it? But they were routed by the men of Ai. This little bitty community absolutely, in short, creamed the Israelite army. And so they come back to camp, their tails tucked between their legs, they're defeated, they're shocked, they're stunned, they can't believe it. They're routed by them, and verse 5 says they killed 36 of them. And then it says they chased the Israelites from the city gate as far as the stone quarries and struck them down on the slopes. At this, the hearts of the people melted in fear and became like water. They can't believe it. And so the soldiers come running back. 36 of them had already been killed. And Joshua is standing there looking at them going, "What in the world's going on? What happened?" And they're shaking, they're scared, they can't believe it. Verse 6. Look at what Joshua's reaction is. He tore his clothes, fell face down to the ground before the ark of the Lord. He remained there till evening. The elders of Israel did the same, and they sprinkled dust on their heads. This was all ceremonial stuff to show their frustration, their lack of understanding, their confusion. What in the world? They were saying basically, "God, what's going on? What's happening here? I thought we were following you and you were with us, and now all this. What's going on? Why is this happening?" That's what this is about. Look at verse 7. And Joshua said to God, "Oh, sovereign Lord, Why did you ever bring the people across the Jordan to deliver us into the hands of the Amorites to destroy us? Is that why you did it? God, why did you bring us here if you were setting us up to be wiped out? If only we had been content to stay on the other side of the Jordan. Verse 8. Pardon your servant, Lord. What can I say now that Israel has been routed by its enemies? The Canaanites and the other people of the country, they're going to hear about this, and they're going to surround us and wipe out our name from the earth. What then will you do for your great name? Not only are they going to wipe us out, but they're also, this isn't good to represent you as well. This is their way of saying, God, this isn't just an embarrassment for us. This is going to be an embarrassment for you. Verse 10 is the most important verse that I want to key in on the last few minutes of this message. Don't miss it. The Lord said to Joshua, and I just want to ask you a question before I go any further. Could he be saying this to you? Stand up. What are you doing down on your face? Do you know what God's saying to Joshua right there? He's saying, why are you laying on the ground praying? Well, now hold on. I thought prayer was a good thing. It is. Why are you laying on the ground praying? This isn't the time to pray. Well, I thought we were supposed to always pray. We are. But there's also a time to do. Joshua, what are you doing down on your face? And I think Joshua, if he was to answer that question honestly, he probably was had to say, well, I'm pretty much pointing my finger and blaming you for the whole thing, because he didn't understand what was going on. God says, stand up. This isn't the time to pray. This is the time to stand up. Verse 11. Here's what he says to him. He says, Israel has sinned. Well, wait a minute. It wasn't all Israel. It was just one guy. And yet you're blaming the whole nation. God said, hold on, I'm not finished yet. Israel has sinned. They have violated my covenant, which I commanded them to keep. They have taken some of the devoted things. They have stolen. They have lied. They have put them with their own possessions. That is why the Israelites cannot stand against their enemies. They turn their backs and run because they have been made liable to destruction. I will not be with you anymore unless you destroy whatever among you is devoted to destruction. That gold, that silver, whatever he took. Go consecrate, cleanse the people. Tell them to consecrate yourselves in preparation for tomorrow. You cannot stand against your enemies until you remove this stuff. You got to get it out. Wow. There's a lot here for us to unpack. I'm just going to hit the highlights, but I really want you to hear me clearly on this, okay? Here's why this is such a big deal in this little story. It is a glimpse. In this story, we get a glimpse of what happens to a community when one person acts irresponsibly. One. I mean, a whole nation was impacted. They lost a battle over one guy's irresponsibility and flagrant disobedience. Now, when you read this from our perspective, you kind of think, well, that's not really fair, God. I mean, you can understand God going after the one guy, but why is he going to make a whole nation suffer, right? I mean, that's what I ask when I read it. And the answer is, we've already covered in the previous weeks, that's the nature of how this thing works. That's how irresponsibility always works. When one person is irresponsible, not only do they reap what they have sown, but everybody that's connected to them reaps what they have sown. That's what he's trying to help them and us understand. It's still true. It's not fair, is it not, for you to be the best family member that you can be, and yet somebody else in the family is irresponsible with their morality or their money or their mouth or alcohol or drugs or whatever it is, you name it. You've done everything that you can to help the family, and yet you end up being the one getting hurt, right? Why? Because that's the nature of irresponsibility. That's how it works. It always has worked that way. And that's what God is trying to help us see here. What you sow, I also reap. If I'm connected to you. Friends, that's why we look around in our culture today, and that's why kids are so negatively impacted today. Not because they've done something directly wrong necessarily, but because they're reaping what mom and dad have been sowing for a lifetime. And while it may not be fair, it's still true. And that, my friends, is why we can't be tolerant of irresponsibility. We cannot let it go because it impacts everyone. See, we look at what others do. We're so guilty of this. I know I have been. We look at what other people do and they go, well, that ain't none of my business. I'm not going to say anything. But eventually what happens, it does become your business, right? If you're connected to them. So are we going to wait until it becomes our business? See, what we got to do is listen to me on this, okay? In love, the most loving thing we can do is go and confront others for their irresponsibility for the sake of the group. Now, I get it. My views have changed over the years. When I was younger, I was a lot more confrontational than I am today. I'm just tired of fighting. I'm tired of having conflict. I don't want any in my life anymore. But that really is not a good thing, because there's still people around me that need to be confronted with certain things, just like I need to be confronted with certain things from time to time. But here's the message of the story. We can't be tolerant of irresponsibility, because if we are, nobody wins and everybody suffers. We've got to learn the handle of this thing of balance between grace and truth. I've said this my entire tenure here as your minister, and I hope that you get this. This is the key to Christianity. It's the key to your life. The balance of grace and truth. You can't be all grace where everything goes and everything is accepted, because you have chaos and you have anarchy. And you can't have all truth where somebody stands in front of you every week and goes, you better turn or you're going to burn. You're going to go to hell for every little. Can't have all that mentality. There's got to be a balance. You got to have grace and mercy and love, but you got to be able to do that by representing the truth, which is what was so beautiful about Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. He was a master at that. He was a master at that, because I've had so many people come to me over the years, they say, well, confrontation might be the right thing to do, but what about the love of Jesus? Aren't we supposed to love everybody? Which in our world today, we think love means accept everything. That's not what love does. Love doesn't mean accept everything. You need to read the New Testament. If Jesus Christ is who he says he is and was perfect, you need to understand that Jesus confronted people everywhere he went. Every single day, all the time. Sincere, loving confrontation is a huge part of our spirituality and our spiritual journey. And the best thing that you can do for an irresponsible person that you see and that you love, for the sake of them and for the team or the family or the church or who it is, to confront with a proper tone, because here's why. Irresponsibility is always contagious, and whatever is rewarded always gets repeated. Every single time. Well, I'm kind of done with this story. You can read the rest of it for yourself, but I'm going to give you the short version of what happens here. This is pretty cool. Here's the Harris paraphrase of this. Joshua does exactly what God tells him to do. He quits praying, gets up off of his face. He sends out a search party. They look all over the Israelite camp. Sure enough, they find the stuff that was stolen in the corner of Achan's tent. They take it back and throw it in with the rest of the rubble at Jericho and leave it there. They punish Achan as an example to the rest of the nation. And then they go and they attack that little community of Ai, and they win hands down, and they continue to move on through the promised land, as God told them they would. Now, with that story in mind, here's a few questions for you and me to consider today. First of all, to all the religious people in the room, do you have a tendency to hide behind your prayers? Do you have a tendency to hide behind your prayers? Are you praying when you actually need to be standing up and doing something? And are you excusing it by just saying, I'll just pray about it? And I'll tell you how you know whether you need to stand up or pray. And I don't want you to miss this, okay? I really want you to get this. If God has already addressed whatever it is that you're praying about in your word, in his word, the Bible, you don't need to pray about it. Okay? I mean, it's amazing to me what people will come to me sometimes and tell me what they're praying about. And I'm thinking, why are you praying about that? You're praying about something that God has already given you a crystal clear answer about. What are you asking for, God to repeat himself somehow in your mind in order to confirm that his word is true? If God has already addressed it, you don't need to pray about it. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about. Maybe you kind of get this a little bit. I've had people come up to me and they've sat down and they're really concerned. I don't think they're listening to themselves, but they're really concerned. They'll say, Sammy, you wouldn't believe it. I've got a real dilemma that I need you to help me and pray with me over. At work, they're asking me to put my name on a document, which is maybe an affidavit or a sworn statement to something that actually didn't happen. And I don't know whether I ought to do that or whether I shouldn't do it or whether I should do it. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, when did being honest become something that you have to pray about? Isn't God's word pretty clear that we're supposed to be honest? Why would you have to go to God and ask him whether or not you're to be honest? I don't understand that. Why should we ever have to ask or pray about whether or not we ought to pay our bills as people of integrity? Doesn't God's word kind of already address that? Why do we have to pray about whether or not we ought to be faithful? Doesn't God's word already talk about that? Or here's one in our culture we're dealing with today. Why would I pray with you about your sexuality? Isn't God's word pretty clear about what our sexuality is supposed to be? Why would I have to pray about what it is that God would will for my life in that area? I think it's pretty well out there. I think it's already been covered. There's a whole bunch of things that have already been covered in his word. I think we need to pray for the strength to carry it out. But if God has spoken, I'm just telling you today, it's time for us to get up off our knees, take responsibility, and quit hiding behind our prayers. This is ridiculous. The other way you can know whether you need to pray or to act is this. Don't miss this. I thought this one through pretty good. If you're trying to pray yourself out of something that you behaved your way into, it's probably time for you to quit praying and start to stand up and do something. Did you catch that? When you substitute prayer for taking responsibility, all that means, don't miss this. When you substitute prayer for taking responsibility, all that means is you are an irresponsible person that happens to pray. That's all it means. If you have financial issues in your life, read God's word, and what you'll discover is it's pretty clear about how we're to handle our resources. Stewardship is not very difficult to discover in God's word. Seek first the kingdom of God, and all these things will be added unto you. It's pretty clear. The question is, when do we start doing that? Not whether we should start doing that. When are we going to start? When are we going to begin by putting him first when it comes to our stuff? Here's a good one. I get people, I've had, I can't tell you, hundreds if not thousands of people that have sat before me and asked me this question. Sammy, I want you to pray over my relationships. I'm looking for a husband, I'm looking for a wife, I'm looking for somebody to spend my life with, and I want you to pray that God would send someone my way. To which I always look back at them and say, where are you trying to find this relationship? And then they start to stutter and they start to stammer. And I just want you to understand, if you're wanting a healthy relationship, stop looking in unhealthy places. You can't be praying for God to give you a healthy relationship when you're looking for your soulmate at 1 a.m. in the morning on a Friday night in a bar. You understand what I'm saying? It's just not going to happen. So my point is, ask yourself when you pray about something, has God already covered this, or am I trying to pray my way out of a situation that I've behaved myself into? The other question is that we have to ask ourselves is, are there irresponsible people around me that are impacting me, close to us, and we're afraid to confront them because we simply don't want to have any confrontation? Listen, This is pandemic as well in our world today. We've got to stop enabling people's poor decisions because as a result, it impacts everyone. Look at our nation. We've got to stop this. Christians have got to start setting the standard for this. And we got to quit emulating the world. We need to set the standard so that the world will begin to emulate us. It's a no-win proposition when everybody loses because we're afraid to take a stand. We're afraid to stand up and do anything. So the question remains, are you taking responsibility for your life, and are you helping other people take responsibility for their lives? I just suggest this, and I'm done with the message. Maybe God today is whispering to you in your ear, it's time for you to stand up and start doing. Yes, keep praying, but start doing. It's time for you to stand up and actually physically, emotionally do something. To make a decision. And maybe the decision is you need to come forward and you need to say, I'm going to be part of the solution by being part of the body of Christ right here at Leesburg. And I've been thinking about it. I've been praying about it for 2 years. Maybe it's time to do it. Maybe it's time to do it. Do that. Surrender yourself in Christian baptism. Maybe it's time for you to get honest about whatever it is that's keeping you from being who God intended you to be. I don't know what it is. I just think it's probably time for a lot of us to start doing and quit praying. Maybe God's whispering in your ear today. So here's what I'm going to do. Okay? I'm going to lead in a corporate prayer that all of us will start become doers. And then I want you to take this challenge very seriously with you as you leave and see what it is that God would be challenging you to stand up and do today. And then John's going to come up and he's going to make announcements and he's going to sing a song. He's not singing a song. I'm just seeing if you're all awake. He's not going to do that. He's going to come give announcements, and then we're going to get out of here, all right? So let's pray about this. Father, we're just grateful that we can kind of get a little tap on the head or smack in the cheek or whatever you want to call it with a dose of reality today, because a lot of us have been hiding. We've been masking our to-do list with a prayer list, and we've confused the two thinking that they're both the same, and that's not necessarily the case. I hope that we'll always be people that advance on our knees and advance through prayer, Lord, but as wherever we go. But we've got to be people that advance. We've got to be people that do as well as pray. This is going to be our greatest testimony. It's going to be the way we're going to show the light to the world. It's a way we're going to be able to make a difference in our community. It's a way that politics are going to change in this world. It's a way that every facet, our schools, the education system, every bit of everything is going to change when we begin to be not just prayers, but also doers. And so whatever it is that you're whispering in everybody's ear today, and mine as well, oh Lord, I pray that we'll leave this place with a conviction. The conviction that when you say something, you mean it. And there's going to be a day of justice. And there's no time for us to be idly by, passively putting that burden on others. So Lord, I pray that you'll help us. Help us to live under the conviction of the balance of grace and truth so that we can be able to have the impact of taking your word to the world as you intended it to be, that people can see and be drawn to the light of truth, as we share it in grace and love. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.